In this tutorial, I'm going to create a polygon chair using the polygon cube, the bevel tool, and the insert edge loop tool. I'll start by introducing a tall polygon cube. Going to create polygon primitives cube. I'll make a bit of a footprint here for the wooden structure of the chair, and I'll drag it up to give it some height. Now I want it to look more like wood, which means the edges would be a little bit rounded. I'll start by holding down Command Shift, and I'll go to Edit Mesh, and I'll choose Bevel, and then I'll hold down Command Shift, going to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop Tool. Now these are there to be used again and again once I have the settings. So if I had to make a bunch of furnishings with the same qualities, I could simply click on that. But we have to set what we would like that to be before we start to use these tools. So once again, I'll go to Edit Mesh, Bevel, and I'll go to the little white box at the far end of that menu. When I click on it, it gives me the bevel options. I've set the width of the bevel to 0.25, and I'm going to make the segments 2, and I'll leave everything else the same. I'll hit Apply, and now if I select my geometry, I can see where the extra geometry has been added. Now I want to have a contour rather than be straight, so we're going to use the Insert Edge Loop for that. But once again, we're going to go to the option window first. Mesh Tools at the top of the user interface, Insert Edge Loop, and the little white box. And in the Options and Settings window, I'll choose Multiple Edge Loops, and I'll choose 3. And if I select the tool on my toolbar now, and I click on any of the vertical edges I see, it will put all those edges in equidistant for me. I'll close out the options, right click, and go back to object mode. Now all I need to do to make this a bit of a curve on this geometry, I'll go to one of my orthographic views, side or front. I'll right click and choose vertex, and I'll start by selecting the 3 rows on the inside of the shape, and I'll pull it forward a bit. Deselecting, I'll select the middle alone, and I'll click and drag that a little bit further. Now if I were to return to my perspective view and hit 3 on the keyboard, I can see what it would render like when I use Arnold's render window. If I were working in a game environment, I would have to add a poly smooth to this and add more faces. Now we need 2 of these surfaces. So I'll go to my top view, and I'll hit Command D, and I'll drag it out. In my perspective view, I'm looking at something like this. Now I want to put the seating area first before I do the front legs. Returning to the top view, I'll right click, and I'll choose Create Polygon Primitives Cube, and I'll click and drag the seating surface, and then I'll go to my perspective view to give it a little thickness. In one of my orthographic views, I'll just determine where I'd like it to be in relationship to the back legs. Now with the seat, it always tapers in the back where it meets the back legs, and it's wider in the front. So I'll right click and I'll choose Vertex, and I want to select all the vertices through the geometry, so I'm going to marquee select, and then I'll hit R on the keyboard and I'll taper the back a bit. I'll right click and return to my object mode, and I'll go to my perspective window. Now I want this to be a little rounded like the wood as well, but I'd like it a little rounder than the default settings. I'll go to Edit Mesh, Bevel, and the attributes. I'll make the width 0.45. I'll hit Return, and I'll hit Apply. I can see now it's rounded that a bit for me. Now I want to be able to suppress the base a little bit. So we're going to add the edge loop tool for this. Now we have to reset the edge loop because now it's set to add 3 edges, and I only want to be able to put 1 from the back to the front and then from side to side. I'll go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, and I'll go to the Settings. I'll hit Reset Setting. Now when I access the tool on the dock, I can click on any edge. I'll introduce the one in the middle, then I'll click and introduce the one on the side. You'll notice that when you introduce an edge, the most recent one is brown, which means I could hit W to move it, E on the keyboard to rotate it, I could hit R to scale it. If I want to move the ones that I've already put in, I could just double click on that now, and I could move that as well. I'll right click and choose vertex, and I'll just select the middle vertex and I'll just pull it down a bit, and I'll go to my object mode. All we need to do now is add the front legs and the back cushion. Let's start by adding the front legs. Going to my orthographic view in the side where I'm looking at the leg like this, I'll select it, I'll hit Command D to duplicate, and I'll pull it to the front. Now usually with a chair, this leg would be going in this direction, not curving in. I'll go to Rotate Y in my channel box, I'll put in 180 and hit Return. And the leg in the front would probably be something like that. Now I don't need all of this geometry up here, so I'll hit 4 on the keyboard, and I'll right click and choose Face, and I'll select all the faces on the top, and I'll hit Delete. I'll right click and choose Object Mode. I'll go to my top view, hitting Command D on the keyboard, I'll drag the copy over to the other side. Now I'll return to my perspective view, and I'm going to duplicate the base. I'll hit Command D to duplicate it, and I'm going to rotate it. I'll hit E on the keyboard, and I'll actually do this by hand because I want it to match the angle of the chair here. So I've started to rotate it. I'll go to one of my orthographic views in the side. I'll put it roughly into position, and then I'll go to my perspective view, and I'll start to scale it. And if I wanted to edit this so perhaps it was wider at the top than the bottom, I would right click and choose Vertex, and I'll grab the top vertices, I'll grab the bottom one, and I'll taper it. Right click and go to my object mode, so I have something like this. Now it would bow a little bit more back in the middle, so I'll right click and I'll choose Vertex, I'll select the vertices, I'll hit W on the keyboard, and I'll pull them all back. If I would hit 3 on the keyboard, I get a better idea of what it will look like with the smooth proxy when I render with Arnold. And there's our simple chair.